Welcome to one of the most disturbing cases ever reported in Charleston. Please leave a comment below telling us where you're watching from and what time it is when you're listening to this narration. We want to know what places and times of day or night these written accounts reach. Charleston society first started talking about the fires in 1848, not the usual problems that come with living in a city made of wood and candlelight, but flames that were planned and methodical and seemed to choose their targets with eerie accuracy. Always the biggest homes on the battery, always when the families had gone to their summer homes, and always leaving nothing but ash and questions. The Rutledge estate on Meeting Street was the first. It was a 3-story federal mansion that had been a symbol of Charleston's upper class for almost 40 years. The night watchman saw an orange glow coming from the back of the property around midnight on the 12th of July, 1848. The mansion's heart was already on fire by the time the bells rang and the water brigades got together. The investigators were confused, not only by how quickly the fire spread, but also by how precisely it did so. The main house burned down, but not the carriage house, the kitchen building, or even the slave quarters, which were almost 20 yards away. It burned as if someone knew the house well, wrote Charleston Mercury editor Robert Barnwell Rhett in a letter that was found decades later in his family's archives. It was as if someone who had lived there for years had chosen the best place and way to bring it down. As was common for Charleston's wealthy families during the summer months, the Rutledge family had left just 3 days earlier for their summer home in Flat Rock, North Carolina. Only the household staff stayed behind, 5 slaves who were in charge of taking care of the property while the family was away. The fire didn't kill any of the 5. All 5 gave the same story. They were sleeping in their rooms when the fire woke them up. Earlier that evening, none of them had seen or heard anything strange. As was usual, the Charleston City Guard asked each servant a lot of questions. Captain William Johnson was in charge of the investigation, and his detailed notes are still kept in the Charleston County Historical Society archives. Johnson wrote, "The slaves seem genuinely shocked by the fire, but their identical testimonies make it seem like they have rehearsed them. Either they have coordinated their stories, or someone has told them exactly what to say." A week went by. The ruins of the Rutledge home were still being cleaned up when the Pinckney home on South Battery caught fire on July 26. The family was gone again. Once more, only the main house burned down, and the other buildings around it were not harmed. The house slaves said they didn't hear or see anything strange until the fire was well underway. Charleston society was in a state of panic by August 9th, when the third mansion, owned by the famous Middleton family, burned down in the same way. It was clear that someone was systematically targeting the homes of the city's oldest families, and they knew all about their schedules and weaknesses. On August 11th, the Charleston City Council held an emergency meeting. Mayor Thomas L. Hutchinson suggested that the city's southern districts, where the wealthy lived, have twice as many night patrols. His second idea, which was more controversial, was to require all household servants to register and keep detailed records of their movements and relationships. This plan was meant to help all domestic workers, but it was clear that it was really aimed at enslaved household servants who were becoming more and more suspicious. Councilman James Harrison said in a speech that was recorded by the council clerk, "The threat comes from within our homes. We have let vipers into our homes, trusted them, and given them control over our most private areas. Now we are paying the price for that misplaced trust." Charleston's worried upper class liked the story of trusted house slaves betraying their masters, but they couldn't find any solid proof. There were no explosives found. No witnesses came forward to say they saw any suspicious people. It was as if the houses themselves had called the fires into being. A letter came to the Charleston Mercury's offices on August 21. The handwriting was beautiful and well-educated, clearly from someone who went to school. The letter was signed Justice and started with the words, "I have burned 3 houses. I will burn 7 more." These words sent shudders through Charleston society. The letter was quickly given to the police, who kept its contents secret from the public until 1869, when Eliza Middleton, a historical archivist, put together the events while looking into her family's past. Middleton's papers say that the letter went on. Each house represents a sin. Each family carries guilt that no one else knows about, but I do. The flames are just the outside sign of the corruption that has been growing inside these walls for decades. The investigation by Captain Johnson got more serious. He made a list of educated free blacks and slaves who could read and write, paying special attention to those who had access to several wealthy households. There were 47 people on the list. They were all questioned. Their handwriting was compared to the strange letter, and their whereabouts during the fires were closely examined. Charleston's elite, on the other hand, became even more afraid. People who had planned to stay in the city during the summer left quickly. People who were already at their summer homes decided to stay there for an open-ended amount of time. Along Battery and Meeting Street, houses were empty because their owners were too scared to go back. Thomas Grimball, a well-known banker and plantation owner, got a letter at his country estate near Edisto Island during this tense time. This letter was very personal, unlike the public letter to the newspaper. It said, "Your oldest son knows what happened in the cellar during the Christmas party of 1843. She was 13 years old, and her name was Rebecca. You called her Becky." The marks on her back never healed right. Grimball burned the letter right away. He then wrote to Captain Johnson, asking for more security at his home in Charleston because he was worried about the recent pattern of fires. The house stayed the same for 17 days. It burned down on September 8th. Making it the fourth mansion to do so. One big difference between the Grimball fire and other fires was that it started in the basement. Fire investigators found that the fire started in a small storage room that, according to the house plans, had been used to house difficult slaves who needed to be kept alone. A few years ago, the room had been turned into a storage space. The mysterious writer became more active after the Grimball fire. The Manigaults, the Draytons, and the Ravenels all got letters. They were all old Charleston families with a lot of money that came from slave labor. Each letter made specific accusations. A young woman sold away from her children after refusing to sleep with her master. Twins sold at auction even though they had promised to keep them together. And a cook was blinded in one eye as punishment for making a meal that a guest didn't like. The specifics were clear, with dates and names given. And every letter ended with the same scary promise. The fire comes next. City officials tried to stop these letters from getting through by setting up a special unit to watch the mail, but they kept coming, sometimes delivered in the usual way, and other times found on doorsteps or breakfast tables, as if someone with access to the houses had put them there. 10 mansions had burned down by the beginning of October. The pattern grew beyond Charleston's peninsula to include plantations in the countryside around it. The city had become paranoid. The number of slave patrols went from 2 to 3. At night, the servants were locked in their rooms. Some families fired all of their staff because they didn't want to keep people around who might start a fire. They would rather do the work themselves. Rachel Singleton, the 7-year-old daughter of plantation owner Edward Singleton, was the first to connect the victims in a way that went beyond their obvious status as wealthy slaveholders. Rachel wrote in a diary found in the ruins of the Singleton plantation house, which burned down on October 12th. "Father got the letter yesterday. He locked himself in his study and drank until after midnight. This morning at breakfast, he wouldn't look me in the eye." The letter talked about Mother's cousin Daniel and a trading company that was started in 1830. "I listened at Father's door tonight and heard him talking to Uncle Frederick. They kept saying the ship and sounded scared that he had found proof of their involvement." The ship Rachel talked about was later found to be the Echo, which the U.S. stopped. Navy ship, with 450 enslaved Africans on board in 1858, which was a clear violation of the federal ban on the international slave trade that had been in place since 1808. But records from the past, put together by maritime historian Richard Thompson in 1961, showed that the Echo was just the last in a long line of illegal slave ships run by a group of Charleston businessmen. Thompson's research showed that this group had been working together since at least 1830, bringing thousands of Africans who were illegally enslaved into the United States long after this kind of activity had been made illegal. The group was made up of people from all 10 families whose homes had burned down. Charleston was under siege as October came to an end. The city's economy had come to a standstill. Families took turns sleeping, with at least one person always awake and looking for signs of fire. Owners had to keep an eye on their household slaves all the time, which made them tired and caused a lot of stress in the home. Captain Johnson got a big break on October 30th. A letter that was on its way to the Pringle family's house had been found. They caught the messenger, a free black man named Isaiah Thompson. Thompson said during questioning that he had gotten the letter from another free black man, a carpenter named Joseph Williams, who had paid him a small amount to deliver it. Charleston officials knew Joseph Williams. He was born into slavery in 1810, but his owner, a progressive minister, set him free in 1832. The minister had taught him how to read and write, and how to be a carpenter. Williams was known for his great craftsmanship and was often hired to work on the homes of Charleston's rich and famous. This gave him a lot of knowledge about their floor plans and daily routines. It was even worse to find out that Williams's mother had been on an illegal slave ship that came to Charleston in 1829. The Rutledge family bought her. They owned the first mansion to burn down, and she died giving birth to a second child in 1833. The baby had also passed away. Captain Johnson got statements from witnesses that said Williams had been saying for years that his mother had been healthy before she gave birth and that her death was caused by poor care. On the evening of October 30th, city guards surrounded Williams's small house on Anson Street. Williams wasn't there. His neighbors said he left that morning with a small bag and told them he had been hired to work on a plantation outside of the city. A search of his house found a locked desk drawer with letters that had not been sent to the other 7 families on his list. Each one listed specific crimes, such as being involved in illegal slave trading and committing acts of violence and cruelty that had mostly gone unpunished. The most important thing that investigators found was a journal written by Williams that explained how he started the fires. He really did use his carpentry work to study each house, finding weak spots in the structure and planning how to get in. But he wasn't the only one who did it. In each case, he had gotten to know at least one household slave who had been abused in a certain way by their owner. These people had let people into the houses and sometimes even helped start the fires. The last entry in the journal, dated October 29th, said, 10 flames for 10 crimes. Justice has been partially served. I leave the remaining 7 to God's judgment. As my time here draws to a close, I have received word that passage has been secured on a vessel bound for Haiti. By the time this journal is discovered, I will be beyond the reach of Charleston's law, though not beyond the reach of my conscience, which remains troubled by the methods I have employed to achieve justice. A huge manhunt began, reaching from Charleston to every port city along the eastern seaboard. Ships going to the Caribbean were searched. Authorities in Haiti, Jamaica, and other places where a free black man might be able to find safety got descriptions of Joseph Williams, but no one ever found any proof of him. The 7 families who got the letters that were never sent never saw their homes burn. But over the next few years, each family slowly but surely fell apart. The Panic of 1857 brought down the Alston banking fortune. During the Civil War, the Huger plantation was destroyed. The other families saw their wealth and power slowly fade away because of bad investments, legal problems, or the economy changing after emancipation. Captain Johnson, who had been in charge of the investigation, left the Charleston City Guard in 1850 and started his own private detective agency. After his death in 1872, people found a sealed envelope among his papers that contained his private thoughts on the case. He wrote, "The evidence against Joseph Williams seems strong, but there are some inconsistencies that bother me. The handwriting in the threatening letters is similar to that in Williams's journal, but there are small differences that make it seem like they were written by different people. What bothers me even more is how Williams, despite his unusual education, could have learned so much about the illegal slave trade of Charleston's most powerful families, information that was carefully kept secret from most white citizens of similar status." Johnson's notes indicate that he started to think that Williams might have been working with or even for someone who was connected to Charleston's white elite, someone who could get to business records and family secrets that even the most well-off free black man in Charleston before the Civil War couldn't. Maybe someone has their own reasons for wanting to hurt these families. In 1948, exactly 100 years after the fires, historian Margaret Thornwell published The Charleston Fire Conspiracy, which was based on newly discovered letters between several well-known Charleston clergymen of the time. The letters talked about a conscience-stricken participant in the trade who was said to have given Joseph Williams proof of the illegal slave trade. Thornwell thought that this unknown person, who may have been a business partner who was sick of the business, had used Williams as a tool in a plan for revenge that worked for both of them. We may never know the whole and true story of the Charleston Mansion fires. The last person who is known to have talked to Joseph Williams directly died in 1895, taking with her whatever knowledge she had. The families involved worked hard to erase the events from Charleston's official history, and for many decades they were mostly successful. The ash-covered foundations of 10 grand houses, the scattered papers that have survived the years, and the whispers that still go around among some of Charleston's oldest families are all that is left. These are stories of an educated carpenter who brought terrible punishment on those who thought their wealth and position would always protect them from the consequences of their actions. Some tour guides in Charleston's historic district still point out the empty lots where certain mansions used to be and say that the properties are still cursed and can't be lived in. Not many people talk about the fires directly. Even fewer people say the name Joseph Williams. But the story is still there for those who are determined enough to put it all together in some archives, in old journals and yellowed newspaper clippings. It serves as a reminder that the most terrifying fires are not caused by random chance, but by the cold, calculating flame of human vengeance. Even now, there are still reports from Charleston of construction workers finding burned foundations when they start digging for new buildings near the battery. More than one crew has found small, carved wooden tokens buried deep in the ground. Some say they are carpenter's markers, left behind as signatures by a craftsman who built with more than just wood and nails. He also used fire and revenge. There is one last interesting thing about this case. In the Charleston Fire Department archives, workers found a small sealed box hidden in a wall while renovating their headquarters building in 1965. There was a yellowed page inside, with only one sentence written on it in the same beautiful handwriting as the threatening letters from 1848. Justice comes for everyone, if not in this life, then in history's judgment. No one has ever been able to prove that the handwriting belonged to anyone. The most disturbing thing about the Charleston Mansion fires may not have been the destruction itself, but how they systematically revealed secrets that Charleston society had worked so hard to keep hidden. Each fire lit up not just a building, but also the dark base on which much of the city's wealth and status had been built. In 1869, as Reconstruction changed the South, a woman named Martha Goodwin, who had been a slave, gave testimony to a federal commission looking into crimes that happened during slavery. Goodwin, who had been owned by the Pinckney family, who were killed in the second fire, said he knew what happened during the mansion burnings. The National Archives has her account, which gives a different view than what is found in official Charleston records. Goodwin said, "The fires were no mystery to those of us who lived within those walls. We knew which floorboards creaked, which doors were left unlocked, and which masters kept secrets." When the letters started coming, word spread through Charleston's invisible community, those who served food, washed linens, and raised children while staying out of sight. Many people knew Joseph Williams. Some helped him, and none betrayed him. Goodwin's testimony pointed to a much larger network of resistance than what official reports said. It wasn't just one carpenter acting out of personal anger. It was a coordinated effort backed by dozens of people, both enslaved and free, who had been harmed by Charleston's aristocracy. In 1952, construction workers who were fixing up an old carriage house that used to belong to the Huger family found a hidden compartment under the floorboards, which gave this other story more support. There was a small wooden box inside that looked like a ledger. It was water damaged, but still somewhat readable. The ledger had dates, names, and locations. It was a detailed record of when people moved between homes, when they received packages that weren't labeled, and when they could get into different properties. Historian Thomas Maybank looked at the ledger before it went missing from the Charleston Museum archives in 1954. He said it showed that there was a coordinated underground network operating in Charleston's enslaved and free black communities. Maybank thought that the network had mostly existed to share information and help each other out, but Williams had used it to carry out his campaign of targeted revenge. The loss of the ledger and other important documents about the fires from supposedly safe archives shows that people are still trying to hide some parts of Charleston's history, even in the middle of the 20th century. The descendants of the families who were affected still had a lot of power in the city's institutions. One document that survived was the long confession of Samuel Porter, who used to be the overseer at the Drayton plantation. A Union Army chaplain wrote it down in 1865. Porter, who was dying of tuberculosis and looking for forgiveness, said he had seen the early planning stages of what would become the mansion burning campaign. Porter says that Williams first went to a number of white abolitionists with proof of the illegal slave trade in order to get the law to punish those responsible. People kept telling him that no court in South Carolina would hear a case against the city's most powerful men. Porter said, Williams reportedly said, "If the law offers no justice, then justice must come by other means after trying every legal option." Porter's confession has a detail that other accounts don't: the supposed involvement of Harold Whitmore, a lawyer from the North who had come back to Charleston harboring increasingly radical abolitionist views. Porter said that Whitmore had given Williams legal papers that showed how the illegal slave trading group made money. Williams wouldn't have been able to get this information through his own contacts. If Porter's story is true, Whitmore's role makes an already complicated conspiracy even more so. Census records show that Whitmore left Charleston suddenly in October 1848, just as the search for Williams was getting more intense. He then reappeared in Boston 2 years later, where he practiced law until he died in 1875. His widow gave Harvard Law School his personal papers, but they don't mention Joseph Williams or the Charleston fires. It looks like some pages were taken out of his journals, from 1,845 to 1,850. The role of white abolitionists in the mansion burnings is still a point of contention in the story. Some historians, including Thornwell, find strong evidence for this kind of cooperation. Some people think that saying that white co-conspirators did the complicated planning makes Williams less smart and less able to make decisions. The truth is probably somewhere in the middle. There was a network of people who resisted slavery, that crossed racial lines, and were united by their opposition to the cruel form of slavery that Charleston's elite used. It is clear from the records that the investigation came to an end when Williams went missing. By November 1848, Charleston police had arrested 27 free blacks and slaves who were thought to be involved in the plot. 3 people died while in custody under strange circumstances. The rest were either sold to traders in the Deep South or put in jail for other crimes that had nothing to do with the fires. Captain Johnson's investigation files say that he was unhappy with this result. He wrote in a private letter to his brother in Virginia, "Politics has overwhelmed justice. The guilty parties, those who actually struck the matches, may indeed be among those arrested, but I am certain the true architect of this conspiracy remains at large." More troubling is the complete cessation of interest in pursuing certain avenues of investigation that might implicate white citizens. I am being directed quite forcefully to focus exclusively on the Negro carpenter and his immediate associates. The conspiracy of silence went beyond the police. Charleston's newspapers covered the fires a lot at first, but then stopped doing so in November 1848. The Charleston Mercury, which had gotten the first public letter from Justice, wrote an editorial on November 15th asking for less public talk about the fires. They said that too much talk only makes things worse and could lead to more fires. By December, people weren't talking about the fires in public anymore. The arrested suspects went through the legal system with little media attention. People quietly rebuilt or sold their homes. Families who were affected by the fires slowly got back to their normal lives. But many of them noticed that their peers treated them differently in a small but noticeable way. A letter found in 1968 among Elizabeth Alston's personal belongings, the daughter of one of the targeted families, suggests that the social effects were worse than public records show. Though no one speaks of it directly, the fires have cast a pall over our family that shows no sign of lifting. Invitations arrive less frequently. Conversations stop when father enters a room. It is as though Charleston society has collectively decided we must have done something to deserve our fate, and while they will not name it openly, they have judged us accordingly. The fires of 1848 changed Charleston's physical and social landscape forever. But the most important change may have been in people's minds. The campaign of strategic arson demonstrated the vulnerability of a system that relied on absolute control. Charleston's wealthy people built their homes to be like fortresses of privilege, with separate entrances, servant staircases, and clear lines between white and black areas. The fires showed that these barriers were not real. The same deep understanding that helped enslaved people do their jobs well also gave them the power to kill. Charleston society found the attacks deeply disturbing because they were so precise. They only targeted families involved in illegal slave trading, not slaveholders in general. This was not random violence. It was planned revenge, which means that someone who could tell how guilty someone was even in a system that Charleston's elite thought was always right. After the Civil War, as Charleston rebuilt and changed, the story of the mansion fires slowly became part of a larger story about how the South was a victim. Tour guides started saying that the burns were caused by people who supported the Union or criminals who took advantage of the chaos of war. This moved the events from 1848 to the 1860 seconds. By the early 1900s, not many people in Charleston could accurately date the fires, and even fewer people admitted that they were planned and aimed at families involved in illegal slave trading. This forgetting of history wasn't an accident. It was planned. In 1910, the Charleston Historical Society set up a committee to harmonize discordant elements in our city's historical narrative. The committee was especially worried about the mansion fires, which showed slaveholders not as kind paternalists, but as criminals who were doing things that had been illegal for decades. The committee's answer was not to deny that the fires happened, but to break up the story, treating each one as a separate event, hiding the links between the victims, and putting more emphasis on the damage to property than on the moral issues that came up with each fire. This plan worked pretty well to take the teeth out of the most dangerous parts of the story. But the truth lived on in bits and pieces, in family stories passed down through generations of Black Charlestonians, in scattered documents that weren't destroyed, and in the city's own architectural record, which shows empty lots and newer buildings breaking up rows of period homes. As the civil rights movement made the country face its past stories of slavery and its effects, Charleston historian Gerald Haywood tried to do the first full academic study of the 1848 fires in 1965. His research led him to the sealed records of the Charleston Orphan House, where he found intake forms for 4 children that Joseph Williams gave up in October 1848, just before he went missing. The intake forms said that Williams and his wife Sarah, who died in 1846, had 4 children: a 3-year-old, a 10-year-old, a 7-year-old, and a 5-year-old. Williams's letter that came with the surrender asked that the children be placed with God-fearing families outside of Charleston. It also included enough money to pay for their care for a year. The letter ended with a line that Haywood thought was very revealing about Williams's reasons for doing what he did. "I act now not from want of love for my children, but from its abundance. The path I have chosen cannot accommodate innocence. They must be spared both the burden of my actions and the retribution that will surely follow. When they are grown and ask after their father, tell them only that he sought justice in a world that offered none freely." This document, which suggested that Williams had known and accepted the personal cost of his campaign, made the story of an anger-driven vendetta more complicated. Instead, it showed a man making a planned sacrifice his relationship with his kids to get what he thought was right. The most mysterious thing about this whole thing is what happened to Joseph Williams himself. There is no proof that he ever arrived in Haiti or any other Caribbean country. There is no record of a death certificate or burial. After October 1848, he just disappeared from history. Many theories have come up because of this absence. Some historians think that Williams made it to Haiti and lived there under a different name. People also think he might have gone to Canada or even England, where slavery ended earlier and a skilled carpenter could find work without having to deal with the racism that is common in the U.S. Some people thought Williams never left Charleston at all. They said that his planned escape was found out and he was quietly killed, with no record of what happened to his body. In an 1871 account by Frederick Douglass, there is a tantalizing possible sighting. He wrote about meeting an old carpenter in Haiti who knew so much about Charleston society and its wrongdoings that it seemed like he had been there himself instead of just hearing about it. Douglass, who didn't know the whole story behind the Charleston fires yet, didn't write down the man's name or look into his past any further. In 1970, descendants of the Middleton family hired someone to fix up their ancestral plantation home outside of Charleston. This may be the best ending to the story. When workers took down an old mantelpiece, they found a small hole with a sealed glass bottle inside. Inside was a yellowed piece of paper with a message written in the same unique style as the threatening letters from 1848. Remember that foundations built on suffering will never stand secure. The past is never truly buried. Justice may delay, but it does not forget. The Middleton descendants gave the note to the Charleston Museum anonymously, and it was on display for a short time before being taken down during a reorganization of the collection in 1973. It hasn't been shown in public since then. There is no clear answer or satisfying ending to the story of the Charleston Mansion fires, where justice is either served or denied. Like a lot of American history about slavery and its effects, it is still broken up, disputed, and hard to see. We can mostly see it through its negative spaces and long-lasting effects, not through a clear and agreed-upon story. We know for sure that in 1848, 10 of Charleston's biggest houses burned down to the ground. 10 families who were directly involved in illegal slave trading had to face the public consequences they had been avoiding for a long time. And, for a short time, the carefully kept social order of the South before the Civil War was thrown into chaos by the actions of people who were seen as weak in that system. The fires themselves have long since cooled, but their heat can still be felt in archives and family histories, in buildings that are no longer there, and in institutions that are no longer there. This is a reminder that no system of oppression, no matter how deeply rooted, has ever been safe from the flames of resistance. People who visit Charleston's historic district today walk by the places where these mansions used to be, not knowing the complicated history that lies beneath their feet. Tour guides tell sanitized stories about Charleston's golden age while pointing out architectural details and family crests. Not many people talk about Joseph Williams, the carpenter whose skill built things and whose determination tore them down. Even fewer people recognize the network of enslaved people who helped him by turning their deep knowledge of these homes from a tool of servitude into a weapon of revenge. But if you visit the city during the hot, humid months of summer, when the air is heavy and still, you might smell smoke on some streets near the Battery. This is a faint smell from a time when Charleston's night sky glowed orange with the exposure of long-buried secrets, and justice came on a carpenter's terms when the law's remedies failed. Joseph Williams wrote in the last entry of his recovered journal, "They thought their wealth made them untouchable and their position unassailable. They forgot that the same hands that built their mansions could also turn them to ash. Let history remember that no one, not the highest judge nor the wealthiest merchant, stands above justice forever."